Coming to you from the studios of AM 950 KTNF, the progressive voice of Minnesota. This is The Gailey Show. I'm your host, JP Derabagosia. So a programming switch here. We are actually going to go back to the news for our next segment. Representative Jamie Long, who is the DFL floor leader in the Minnesota State House, joins us. The House remains in gridlock, as there's no power sharing agreement between the DFL and the GOP. The DFL has been boycotting the start of the session because the GOP is trying to take control of the chamber, which they have no basis to do, and they're refusing really to negotiate in good faith, I would say, but maybe that's me editorializing. Representative Long, what can you tell us about the state of the state?
Well, hey, JP, good to be with you. Thanks for having me on. So we are in a situation where we had a tie coming out on election day, and we have had two challenges to folks on our side. We lost one of them and won one of them. And so we're going to be having a special election in March where we will be back to a tie. So we have said in that period of time, no problem. GOP, you're up one vote. You can run the place. No issues there. But the problem is that they have said that they're going to use that time to kick out Representative Brad Tabke, who they lost the challenge to him that they brought. This is a representative from Shakopee, and so he won his court challenge, won on election day, and won in a recount, and yet they're saying they're going to kick him out. And they've also said that when we're back to a tie, they're not going to agree to co-govern, that they want to run the House for 2 years. So that is really an undemocratic and unfair principle. And they tried to take over the chamber once already. They tried for 2 weeks. We had to go to the state Supreme Court to shut that down, and they found that it was illegal and unconstitutional what they had done. But they've been really willing to go to any lengths to try to seize power that the voters didn't give them.
So, oh my God, there's so much to unpack there. Let's start with Representative Tabke, because that is one of the key sticking points in the negotiations. So Representative Tabke won the race in November by 14 votes.
That's right.
The GOP is claiming that because 20 ballots were not officially counted, they were misplaced, that somehow that would have altered the state of the race. However, in the court challenge, it was found that statistically not possible, that the representative would have won the race regardless. I guess my question is, which is more of a meta question, a constitutional question, is why is there a provision in the Constitution allowing the House to say we're not going to recognize and honor an election of the people?
Right. Well, it kind of goes back to basic separation of powers principles, which is that we want to preserve the ability to seat our own members. And so I don't have a concern with that premise. But the challenge is that when it's abused in this way to kick out somebody who won 3 times already on election day in a recount and in the court, this would be the first time in state history that had been used when the member did nothing wrong, the first time when it would be used against a court finding. So we certainly aren't bound by the courts, but in District 40B, we lost that case. And guess what? Our candidate decided not to appeal and is respecting the decision of the courts. They could have decided, nope, we're going to take it to the state house. This opinion's advisory. The state house gets to determine whether or not I was a resident of my district. He chose not to do that. And yet when the GOP loses in court, they want to ignore that court decision and kick out a duly elected representative. As you said, the court found there was no mathematical way that Brad Tabke could have lost it. 12 of the 20 voters testified how they voted. 6 of them said that they voted for Representative Tabke. So there was no way that he could have made that vote up with the remainder. And the judge found, as he should have, that was very compelling. And so now we're faced with a situation where not only do they want to overturn the voters, overturn the election workers who did a fair recount, and overturn the courts, they really are trying to undermine this fundamental principle that the voters should be the one to select their representatives. They're trying to say we as legislators should be able to decide who represents the district in Shakopee, and that really is outrageous.
I like the distinction that you're making there, because there was an election for a seat and covering Roseville and other parts of the metro area, where it was discovered that the candidate who won, the DFL candidate, did not actually reside in that district and so therefore was ineligible. The DFL accepted the results of that case. There's now going to be a special election because of it, and negotiations came into for a power sharing agreement. It seems really okay. I will use the word hypocritical. I don't know if you're allowed to do that, but it's, we see that the DFL was following what the courts were doing and following the electoral rules. We see in the Senate no problems with the power sharing agreement. The DFL candidate won the special election this past Tuesday, and now the DFL has a 1 vote advantage in the Senate, and now they've gone back to having control of that. It just seems like we're in the situation where the GOP, I don't even know how to describe it, and I know that you're trying to as well. But how do you get past this impasse?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right to be flabbergasted at the hypocrisy on their side. I mean, and also, frankly, the callousness with which they are viewing the rule of law. They knew that the actions they took, uh, right, when Steve Simon gavelled out and found there was no quorum, our Secretary of State, they knew that those were illegal. 68 has always been the threshold for a quorum, and the only reason we were denying quorum was we had to protect the will of the voters in Shakopee and the will of the voters in sending a tie. But they took those actions anyway, and abused our process at the state house, and we had to take it to the Supreme Court to try to stop that. They are also trying to abuse the process that is in place to protect our institution, in effect, to totally denigrate the institution by kicking out a member who has otherwise won election and who a court found had won the election. So those really are indefensible. It's also indefensible to say that when we're in a tie, we shouldn't share power, right? The Senate was faced with the same question after Senator Kerry Dietzich passed away, and they came to the same conclusion that we've offered, which is yes, when you're in a tie, you're going to have to work together, whether you like it or not. That's what the voters said. And they agreed to that, but the House GOP has been unwilling to agree to that very same principle. So how do we get out of this? We've been trying very hard to try to work on a negotiated solution with the GOP. We've been very clear on what our two bottom lines are, which is you got to see Brad and you got to make sure we're co-governing when we are back to a tie in March. You are very welcome to have free reign for the chamber until then, right? To run committees, to elect Lisa Damuth as speaker. We get it. We had an outcome in 40B where we don't have a candidate right now and we need to have a special election. But that does not give them the right to ignore the will of voters of 40B, both on election day when they sent a Democrat, by 30 points, and in March when they're going to elect a Democrat again, to pretend that those voters don't matter and that it's okay to pretend like we're not in a tie. First off, it's not going to work because we could shut the place down, right? They need our
Mhm.
votes to do anything. Uh, and second, it is a total violation of any principle of fairness or democracy that we could imagine. So we're working on it. We've been in negotiations every day since the Supreme Court decision came down. We are hoping that we can get to a point where the GOP acknowledges that this is a common sense, fair offer that we are making. Um, but until then, unfortunately, we're in the position we're in.
Well, and I think that also there was a part of the agreement was very gracious that was offered to the GOP originally. They were offered the speakership and they were offered some, if not most, of the committee chair assignments. It seems kind of baffling to me that they would turn that down, but here we are. What was that look like though? So if a power sharing agreement, say, were reached this weekend, after the special election in March, would another agreement then have to be negotiated, or would whatever happens the first time kind of be the agreement through the rest of this session?
That's the idea, is that we're trying to work it out now so that we have the ability to move forward together. Obviously, once we go back, if we elect Lisa Damuth speaker and don't have power sharing, then we are not in a strong position to be able to protect the will of the voters in 40B. We also aren't in a position really to be able to protect Representative Brad Tapke and the voters of Shakopee. So those are the two fundamental issues that are leading us to the position that we're in. But we're hopeful, and every single day that they waste is a day that they could have been chairing committees, right? The GOP could have been doing the work that they claim that they want to do. So if it really is about doing work for their districts and their constituents, we've given you every opportunity. If it's about fighting, I mean, unfortunately, there's not much we can do. It takes two to negotiate.
Thank you for bringing up the work part of it, because they've created a website and they're trying to spin this narrative in the press about how the DFL is not working, and yet they're still getting paid. And it's like, well, you were getting paid to do illegal things, so
Right. That's right.
that you knew were illegal. So, I mean, what is your response to this narrative that they're trying to spin there, that you're all the ones that are getting paid for not doing work?
Well, it's funny because the reporters now have been asking them, "Well, what are you all doing? Right? You're not going to committees?" And they're like,
Good.
"No, no, we're meeting with constituents." I say, "Well, great. That's what we've been doing for 2 weeks too, right?" I mean, obviously, the only part of our job is not showing up in session. That is an important part of our job, but so is working on legislation, so is meeting with constituents. And we still have plenty of time in session to get to a place where we're able to work together to resolve this going forward, and to do good work on behalf of our state. But no, it's just political talking points.
Speaking of good work, and I think what happened this week with President Trump's federal pause really demonstrated the necessity for why they need to come to a power sharing agreement, because he had utter chaos ready to go and had to finally withdraw his order to pause all federal funding for all of these various programs. But because of what the GOP is doing, you all weren't even able to begin to understand the impact of all of this. I mean, what, where are we at with that? I guess that funding pause. I mean, is that over? Or are they planning on coming back with it? Do you have a sense of?
Sounds like not. I mean, it's a total disaster and chaotic from the Trump administration. They issued this order that was completely irresponsible, not thought out, right? Totally harmful to many folks. We heard folks in our communities who said the Head Start portals were shut down, Medicaid portals were shut down. They,
Mhm.
couldn't put in requests for funding. A number of organizations were saying they might not be able to make payroll this week because of the federal funding issues that are providing important services to Minnesotans. So, there was a public outcry, rightfully, although only from our side. I didn't hear a single Republican criticizing the Trump administration for doing this reckless approach, which would have overruled things that GOP members of Congress voted for, right? Take away all of the power of Congress, yet not a single peep from GOP members of Congress. But they, said that they rescinded it, and then they said, "Nope, we didn't really rescind it. We rescinded the OMB memo, but we didn't take away the executive order." So who knows where we're at? But I think none of us should assume that this is done. Right? They're going to bring this back. And if they move forward with this really unconstitutional approach, it would have a massive impact on our state. And that's exactly the type of thing we should be back at the Capitol talking about.
And well, I'm sure you and I both know that what was in that pause, and I agree, will most likely be back again, causes such havoc on the daily lives of people in greater Minnesota, where the majority of Republican candidates are elected from. It's really, I think that what would be your reaction to this idea that the folks that are in greater Minnesota and in Republican districts aren't fully aware of the harm that this pause would have caused them and may cause them in the future?
That's totally right. This would have huge impacts. I mean, the federal government touches everyone's lives all across the state. It was in terms of the impacts that it would have on veteran services, on public safety, on support for our communities, on healthcare services across the state, community health clinics, on Meals for Wheels, right? All of these programs that people rely on were put immediately at risk, and that impacts everybody across the state, regardless of their political ideology or background. So I do think that the reckless actions of the Trump administration have been stopped for now, but I think they'll be back, and I think we all need to be vigilant.
Absolutely. Representative Jamie Long, thank you for joining us here on The Gailey Show.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
Stay tuned, everyone. We've got more to happen after this break. Welcome back to the Gailey Show. I'm your host, JP Derbergosian. Executive producer Jim Pounds joins me now. We're going to switch back from news programming back to our Culture and Entertainment Fridays. We did have an interview for you with Morgan Morgan, the author. We are going to save that and air that next Friday, so be sure to tune in for that. Very interesting conversation with him about his memoir, My Unleashing, Memoir of a Queer Dad. We actually have clips from the audiobook as well, so be sure to tune in for that next Friday. Right now, Jim and I are going to take an opportunity to review a TV show that is probably one of the most bizarre television series I've watched in a long time. It's called Patterns. It is a gay anthology series that then morphed into this series that, I don't know if they knew it or not, feels very David Lynch, has David Lynch vibes. Would you agree, Jim?
I think they did know it. I've been reading, in anticipation of this, I've been reading about it a little bit. And it says that each episode draws from a different comedic style, such as pantomime, sitcom, and slapstick. So I think one of the reasons why it felt, is this the same show? Are we watching the right thing? You felt so disoriented was deliberate, or was an homage to different styles of comedy, maybe. But it sounded quite deliberate on their part rather than these people don't know what they're doing.
Well, it is a British series. It came out in 2023. You can watch it on Deku if you subscribe to Deku or try a free trial there. You can also access it through a free 7-day trial on Prime Video if you do a trial of Deku there. It was written by Asad Mohal and Daniel Mannheim. It was directed by Rex Glenzie. It has a huge cast. I want to highlight a few people. Rufus Shaljan, who plays a very fey influencer or wannabe influencer. Nina Senekar is in it, Jack Armstrong, and rugby great and LGBTQ activist Ben Cohen also guest stars. Also, some stuff we want to always tell people: there's no depiction or suggestion of animal violence. There are no HIV storylines in any of the episodes. There is a coming out narrative in episode 3. There's no anti-LGBTQ physical, emotional, or spiritual violence. No one dies. But I will say that it is a surreal finale, and I don't want to say anything more than that. But that typical like death at the end of queer like film and TV, that does not happen. And there are some happy endings in terms of relationships, but yeah, there it is. I mean, Jim, I'd say it starts as a relatively simple gay anthology series, right?
It felt very familiar, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to like this. And then every time we turned on a new episode, I would look over at Gordy once in a while, and he would look confused, and we were all sort of like, am I having a stroke or what's happening? But it was in aggregate, and since we know it was deliberate and not that incompetence, I kind of admire it more the more I think about it. I admire the bravery of saying this one's going to be like this and that one's going to be like that. That commercial television in the United States would never allow something that free thinking. So I thought that was great, and I do love the Karen episode because I thought that's something that's often referred to, that somebody's a Karen, and I won't say anything more about it than that. But this is so in your face, not in a bad way, in a good way, where you can't, even if you're a Karen, you can't look away from it. It's compelling, and I just thought it was really, really, really smart.
Yeah. So like the first episodes, the first one it's called Reverse Catfishing. It's a gay riff on You've Got Mail or Little Shop Around the Corner. The second episode is about a gay teenager who's coming out of the closet, and rugby superstar Ben Cohen appears as his imaginary friend, right, to help him through it. The third episode is hilarious because it's a hookup that turns into a 14-day mandatory stay-in-place lockdown because they're exposed to COVID. And, the relationship that ensues over there. But then, Jim, as you said, suddenly you're in this, there's a straight guy who's being set up on dates by his gay son. And then you have this whole episode about two sisters, one of whom is Serbian and the other one is British. And you don't even know they're sisters until halfway through the episode. Very confusing. Right. There's and then all of a sudden you get an episode where 4 women walk in, you've never met them before, and it turns out to be a Karen support group where they're supposed to be getting over being Karens, and it really skewers the logic of it, where it's like, Karens, can they really get over being Karens?
Yeah.
And then there's an episode where we bring some guys back from this first episode who they're being interviewed for a documentary, and the producer is weird, shall we say. I can't say too much about it, but there's something fishy about the documentary itself and what it's doing to them. But then it just, every episode, Jim, like you said, seemingly does not connect together. And at first you're like, oh, well, it's an anthology series. So yeah, every episode is going to be different. But then you start seeing characters showing up in other episodes. So they're like all taking place in the same universe. And it does technically all come together at the end in a very David Lynchian Twin Peaks sort of way.
On some level, it reminded me of This Career Book Saved My Life, only because each of those episodes is the guest and whatever their life was and whatever book they chose. And it follows its own path. We're not trying to force, a genre on it. It becomes whatever conversation it becomes. It's more organic, I think. And this was done that way deliberately, stylistically. And I liked it. The more I think about it, the more people should, take something to settle your stomach and then just write it for all it's worth. Yeah,
I agree. I think it was, halfway through the series watching it, you're like, what is going on? I don't know. And then, when you finish it, you're like, okay, I see what they were trying to do there. And it is worth it. I would give it, we're doing 3. I would give it, I give it 4 out of 5 stars. Very good production quality, a very good acting for the material. There is some writing plot points that you're like, huh? And there's a little bit of cliched writing, but the actors are very good in it and do a good job. So I would give it 4 out of 5 stars. What would you give it, Jim?
I might give it 3 out of 5 because there were 46 people in the series that had a speaking role. That's a lot of people. So it seemed more uneven to me at times. At times I never thought about whether the acting was any good, and at other times it was obvious for me. But
we're going to have to leave it there for right now. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Stay tuned for the Matt McNeil Show. After that, stay tuned for Native Roots Radio. Have a great weekend, everybody.